You know what's interesting about silence? It's the one thing that terrifies people who need control the most. And that's exactly why it has so much power, especially when it comes to avoidant personalities. See, avoidants operate in a space of emotional distance. They feel safe when they're not too close, not too vulnerable, not too exposed. They create walls, not because they don't care, but because caring feels dangerous. Connection feels like a risk they can't manage, so they pull away. They test your reaction. They expect chaos. They expect you to chase, explain, cry, or beg for understanding. And when you don't, when you go quiet, steady, calm, you take away their script. You rewrite the entire dynamic. Silence becomes the message that echoes louder than any argument could. It's not a cold shoulder. It's not passive aggression. It's emotional mastery. It's saying, I'm not here to perform for your fear. Because here's what most people miss. Avoidance thrives on reaction. The moment you chase an avoidant, you confirm their deepest belief that intimacy equals pressure. You become proof that closeness is suffocating. But when you step back, when you stop explaining yourself, and let the silence breathe, you remove that pressure entirely. You give them the one thing they can't easily process: space without pursuit. And in that stillness, something fascinating happens. The silence starts to turn inward. They begin to hear their own echo. For the first time, there's no noise to distract them, no conflict to hide behind, no emotional fog to blame. Just quiet. And in that quiet, discomfort grows. That discomfort is not from you. It's from the parts of themselves they've spent years avoiding. The unresolved guilt, the fear of intimacy, the internal contradictions. Silence becomes a mirror reflecting back everything they've been running from. And that's the power of withdrawal. It's not punishment. It's presence through absence. Most people underestimate how powerful stillness can be. In a world where everyone's shouting to be understood, the person who can remain composed, centered, and quiet stands out. Silence is magnetic because it signals self-control. It communicates that your peace is not for sale. And when you hold that energy long enough, the avoidant starts to feel the imbalance. They realize the emotional gravity they once took for granted is no longer pulling toward them. That's when curiosity begins to replace avoidance. They start wondering, did I lose control here? Why aren't they reacting? Why does this feel so different? And here's where psychology and philosophy intertwine beautifully. In psychology, this is called a pattern interruption. When a familiar behavioral loop is broken, the brain scrambles to find new meaning. Avoidants are used to a cycle of pursuit and retreat. When you stop playing your part, the entire system destabilizes. In philosophy, it's the same principle you find in Stoicism, the power of detachment. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." In this case, the best response is not to mirror their fear, but to embody peace. That peace becomes your message. But let me be clear, this silence isn't about manipulation. It's about alignment. You're not withdrawing to make them chase you. You're withdrawing because the chaos no longer serves you. You're choosing silence because arguing with emotional unavailability never leads to understanding. It only drains your energy. You're stepping into self-respect, and that shift, that grounded energy, is what the avoidant feels most deeply. Think about it like this: the moment you stop explaining your worth is the moment you start living it. The avoidant begins to feel your absence not as punishment, but as consequence. They sense the weight of losing access to your calm, your care, your presence. And that realization, that's when regret begins to surface. They don't beg because you demanded it. They reach out because your silence created a contrast they can't ignore. The truth is, silence forces accountability. It leaves no one else to blame. When you remove yourself with grace, you become unforgettable. Not because you shouted your pain, but because you mastered it. You didn't just close the door, you built peace behind it. And maybe that's what real closure is. Not the conversation you wanted, not the apology you hoped for, but the quiet knowing that your silence spoke all the truth that words couldn't. The avoidant may come back, they may not, but either way, you'll stand taller, calmer, freer. Because the real power isn't in making them beg. It's in realizing you don't need to be heard to be understood. Sometimes the silence is the statement. Calm is one of the most misunderstood forms of strength. Most people confuse it with indifference, but it's not the absence of emotion. It's the mastery of it. When you deal with an avoidant personality, calm becomes your greatest advantage. Because here's what they expect: emotional chaos. They anticipate the meltdown, the pleading, the over-explaining. They know how to handle that. It validates their fear that closeness equals loss of control. But when you meet their distance, with composure instead of panic, when you hold your emotional center without needing to prove anything, you disrupt their entire prediction model. Avoidants thrive on emotional forecasting. They've built mental scripts based on their past, people who chase, people who explode, people who make connection feel heavy. Their nervous system expects intensity, so your calm becomes the unexpected variable that rewires their emotional response. It doesn't fit the pattern. They don't know what to do with it. And that's the moment curiosity replaces defense. See, emotional equilibrium isn't about pretending you don't care. It's about knowing that your reaction doesn't need to perform your worth. It's about understanding that silence, steady tone, and grounded presence communicate something far more powerful than a desperate appeal ever could: self-respect. You're saying, without words, I'm not here to fight for attention. I'm here to protect my peace. There's a psychological principle called effect contagion. The idea that emotions are contagious. People unconsciously absorb the emotional tone of those around them. So when you stay calm, you don't just regulate yourself. You regulate the entire dynamic. The avoidant begins to feel that contrast: your peace against their anxiety, your stability against their emotional volatility. And because human beings are wired to seek equilibrium, your calm becomes magnetic. It's not manipulation. It's resonance. Now, let's go deeper. Calmness is not suppression, it's clarity. It means you've learned how to separate feeling from reaction. You still feel the loss, the confusion, the hurt, but you don't let those emotions dictate your behavior. And when you reach that point, you move from survival to awareness. You stop operating from fear, and you start choosing from alignment. That's emotional maturity, and it's exactly what avoidants aren't used to encountering. Philosophically, it's the embodiment of what the Stoics called apatheia, not to be confused with apathy. It means freedom from being ruled by passion. It's not coldness, it's control. It's the ability to stand in the middle of emotional turbulence and choose stillness over reaction. When you embody that, your energy shifts. You no longer vibrate on the frequency of fear or rejection. You vibrate on the frequency of strength. And avoidants, even if subconsciously, feel that. What makes this even more profound is how calm dismantles power dynamics. Avoidants often maintain control through emotional distance. They retreat, and you chase. That's the rhythm. But the moment you stop chasing, the control collapses. Calm is the great equalizer. It says, you can step back, but I won't follow. I'll just stand still. That stillness breaks the loop. It creates space for them to feel the absence of your energy. And in that space, They start reflecting, sometimes for the first time. Now, I'm not saying this happens overnight. Calmness is a discipline. It's something you practice, not something you fake. You can't force it, you cultivate it. You build it by learning to pause before you react, to breathe before you speak, to choose your energy before you give it away. And that's hard, especially when you're used to proving your love by effort. But the truth is, the most impactful response often comes from restraint. What you're doing in those moments of calm is teaching your nervous system that peace is not a luxury. It's a boundary. You're telling yourself, I can feel deeply without losing myself. And once you live that truth, everything about the dynamic changes. The avoidant, who once pulled away to feel safe, now starts sensing that you are the one who feels safe. Because emotional security is magnetic. It draws people in, even those who fear connection. You don't need to announce your transformation. The energy speaks for itself. The next time the avoidant tries to test you, through withdrawal, silence, or emotional distance, you won't react the same way. You'll simply acknowledge it, without resistance, without explanation. And that subtle shift will shake their perception more than any confrontation ever could. Because at the end of the day, calm is not about winning them back. It's about winning yourself back. It's the quiet declaration that you're done negotiating your peace for connection. You're done proving your worth through reaction. You've chosen emotional freedom over emotional chaos. And that's what truly confuses the avoidant. Not your silence, but your serenity. The realization that you no longer need their validation to feel whole. So if there's one thing I want you to remember, it's this: chaos is a performance, but calm is power. When you stop performing, you reclaim control. And when you reclaim control, you stop waiting to be chosen, because you've already chosen yourself. You know, silence has a strange way of revealing truths we've tried to hide, even from ourselves. When you pull back from an avoidant, when you stop chasing, explaining, or filling every quiet space, that silence doesn't just hang in the air, it echoes. It becomes a mirror. And what's reflected in that mirror is not your absence, but their emptiness. Avoidants build their emotional safety on distance. They convince themselves that space equals control. They believe that if they stay just far enough away, they can't be hurt, they can't be rejected, they can't lose themselves. But when the person who once filled that